let you take it away. I hope
Awesome.
that was it.
It's really nice to hear about what I do because most of the time I don't know. So I learned a little bit already. So thanks everybody.
2022 that I'm recalling.
And I think the rule is, as soon as you're 150 miles from home, you're the expert. So I'm about 3,000 miles from home today, which means absolutely squat. So I'm not going to get too technical before lunch. This is really just about providing you with a little bit of background information, and hopefully one day, if you're working with growers in the region or you're growing yourself, maybe it just triggers something down the road a little bit further. Here to say hello and put some faces to some names, so hello. So a little bit about me. I started with the organization in 2015. I do come from Ontario, which I often preface in this part of the world, that does not mean Toronto. Okay, I am from Ontario. I feel very at home here. These are my kind of people. That's where I come from. Born and raised on a small family farm, cash crop. From the time I was 10 years old, I spent my summers in the hay patch, tossing 50-pound bales around because my father thought it'd be a great idea to put up 50 or 60,000 small square bales of hay and then send them to Florida all year long. So that was my upbringing and part of the reason I can't feel my back today. Got 2 small kids, wife and 2 small kids at home, so I am able to project if this thing goes down. Just let me know and I can raise my voice. I am well trained in that. So joined the company in 2015. Prior to that, a little bit of sales and agronomy experience. I am a corn guy. Again, don't hold that against me. That's the basis of our rotations where I come from. So I'm not going to talk a lot about peas today. We've heard a bit about them the last couple days. A lot of folks here build their rotations around legume crops like that. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the specific pieces around peas as a species. There are some things that we do want to consider a little bit when we're talking about succulent peas versus a field pea. So before we get into that, I'll introduce a little bit about Nortera. I don't need this to be a big marketing pitch, but just to kind of set the stage a little bit for you guys, just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. So as mentioned in the introduction, essentially what I tell people is that if you're buying or eating vegetables that were once canned or frozen in this country, there's about an 85% chance that we grew it. So we contracted the growers, we purchased the seed, monitored the crop all through the season, did the harvesting, all the processing. We have a facility here in Lethbridge that I'll describe here in a moment. All the processing, we have internal marketing and sales teams and distribution teams that get it essentially one step from the grocery store or from wherever it's going. So pretty dynamic business. Often in agriculture we talk about our field to fork story, and I often tell people, when I'm checking out in the grocery store, I don't look at that Mars bar and wonder if it's the high fructose corn syrup that came from my field corn that went into that Mars bar, but I sure spend a lot of time in the frozen and canned section because you just never know whether you actually saw that crop, and you guys are lucky enough to work in the area too. So it's a pretty cool feeling. So a little bit about Nortera. Across the entire company, we've got 5 production regions, Southern Alberta being one with our plant here in Lethbridge. We have 3 processing facilities in the deep southwest of Ontario, 4 more facilities in southwestern Quebec, 2, I'll call it 2.5 in western New York. One of them is just a standalone repack facility. And then 1 in central Wisconsin. That's our footprint today. Most of our sales, as I said, we cover Canada. We're pretty well the only show in town, with the exception of some imports that we're currently competing against, but I'll let that one slide for today. So that's the footprint. In the U.S., most of our sales and market opportunity is down the eastern seaboard. So this particular region is very important and strategic for us as it services the Western Canadian retail and food service markets. So there's really 3 major distribution channels for canned and frozen vegetables in this country. Obviously, it's the retails. So you go to Sobeys, you go to the Loblaws, wherever you pick up your groceries. That's the retail side. So within that, you can break that down 2 ways further. You've got your national brands, so that's the Green Giant particularly, and then your store brands, so your PCs, like President's Choice, Selections, so on and so forth. So we're packing for those brands. The food service channel, those are the, I try not to name drop, but I will. the Gordon Food Service, Cisco Food Service, US Foods. It's those organizations that are then turning around and selling to next door into the hospitals, schools, pretty well anywhere you might find a catered meal, for instance. And then the last one is the industrial chain. So those are organizations or brands like Campbell's Soup, ConAgra brands, so your TV dinners. They're buying a 1,500-pound tote of frozen peas, for instance, and then putting it through their further process to go into vegetable soup or into make your TV dinners. So those are the three major chains, and we service all of those out of Western Canada. So obviously it's strategic because of freight. Our next closest production location is in central Wisconsin and in the Great Lakes region. So we're happy to be here. It is a very unique climate for us. So most of what I'm going to talk about, it's work that I've put together from Eastern Canada. Certainly conceptually, I do believe a lot of it still applies here. You guys will know how to fine tune that way better than I will, but I just wanted to plant the seed, so to speak, and let you guys kind of mull over that over the coming days and see what comes out of your mind. I had a whole sheet of notes here and I haven't opened it up yet, but I'll talk a little bit about our plant here in Lethbridge. It was built in 1941, if you want to take a little trip down memory lane. So it was an expansion from the old Tabor Cannery, or Tabor Canning, and it was put in really to service the war effort. So it continued until, gotta get my notes out, until 1996, at which point the Tabor plant was closed. Big expansion here in Lethbridge with the addition of some freezing capacity and big upgrades to the succulent pea processing line and the sweet corn processing line. That continued. Basically, what that turned into was a 60 to 70% increase in the planted acreage needed to service that facility. Today it processes roughly 38 million frozen pounds annually, and it packages about 50. So you'll notice that number doesn't line up. Obviously there's crops that we don't grow here that are shipped in from other regions. So think your water chestnuts, your mini corns that you get in your stir fry, things that you need to go in a blend of frozen vegetables that we just simply don't grow here. So that's the discrepancy in that number. So Bonduelle purchased the organization from Safeway Sobeys in 2015, and ever since then, about a year and a half or 2 years ago, we transitioned to Nortera just due to a sale. Same organization, same values, same everything, just different coats, and I got to refresh the wardrobe, which is always nice. So a little bit about the process. Quite different than what you're used to with the grain and oilseed crops in the region. This is contracted on an acreage basis, so we have two local representatives here in southern Alberta. Their job is to be the face of Nortera, working directly with the growers, contracting on an acreage basis. We do run under a regulated marketing system here, similar to Quebec and Ontario, which means it's essentially collective bargaining. So there's really no kitchen table negotiating and different deals being made. It's kind of a price is set once a year in the spring, so obviously this year you guys faced all the unknowns with water availability too. We face that too. All at the same time, we're trying to lock in contracts with our customers, not knowing whether we need to pay this much for vegetables or this much for vegetables, and that's a really tough thing to budget for. So just one of the constraints of the business. Yes?
Trying to understand that regulated market, is there something that you can compare that to? Or maybe I'm just slow.
Are you talking about this contract actually?
Yeah, so essentially it's the way we come up with the pricing and the terms and conditions of growing. So the best way I find to describe it, and it doesn't really apply here, but it's kind of a hybrid between, say, a workers' union and supply management, so to speak. So in certain regions, not so much here, but in the east, once you're a grower, you're kind of always a grower. You're locked in, but you're not paying to be in. Just once you have your first contract, unless you really screw up on these items, you will continue to be a grower at, say, 100 acres of peas every year. And that's a good thing for us too, because we're not constantly retraining new producers on the production system.
So is there a grower association?
There is. So in this region, it's the Alberta Vegetable Growers, Alberta processing vegetable growers. So it's made up of elected active growers that sit on the board or are appointed to the board. That board, their main purpose is, or main function is to negotiate the price of vegetables at the beginning of each season prior to planting, and then the other terms and conditions that go along with that. So they're also part of the reason we're here today and working with Farming Smarter, because they do some cost share along with Nortera to get this stuff in the ground here and expand future work with Farming Smarter.
So the regulated part, that's not like provincially or nationally regulated, it's just your own company?
There's some provincial regulations in there, so the Alberta Growers does have a commission that they report to. I can't remember the name in this part of the world. That's getting above my pay grade, but yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, that's kind of the process, and thanks for stopping me, Ken. One of my skills is to go off on a tangent, so I'd prefer to go off on a tangent on things that you guys want to hear rather than my own. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to yell them out at any time. So as I mentioned, growers are on a production contract on an acreage basis. Nortera, so another part of my role is I'm buying all the seed for the company. Another reason why we're doing these cultivar evaluations here. So Nortera is buying the seed and then providing that seed to the grower at our cost. It's our staff that determine what variety gets to be planted, when it gets to be planted, how much gets planted on what day. And that's because, skip ahead a little bit, a crop like peas has an optimum harvest window that's no more than 1 to 2 days long. So if you put a bunch of seed in growers' sheds, it turns into the Wild West in a real hurry. So we need to kind of keep that seed under lock and key to ensure that we put together a good planting and harvest schedule so that we have a particular number of acres falling within that 1 to 2 day window every 24 hours over a 6-week period, using 30 years worth of weather and history that we just kind of know about and a little bit of gut feel. So that's kind of the reason for that. Similarly, some of our customers have particular specs on, say, size of pea, color of pea. There's not a whole lot on other organoleptic properties. How much does it crunch? What's the sweetness profiles? We don't deal with a whole lot of that like they would in the potato worlds maybe, but there are some processability traits that I'll discuss more about corn a little bit later. So the biggest part here is, our organization needs to have a little bit of control just to maintain that raw product supply and maintain control of that to ensure that the buildings are full all the time. Yes, sir.
Oh, just how many acres would an average grower have here in Southern Alberta?
So we've got growers that range anywhere from a full circle up to 5 or 6 is probably the top end, dependent on the crop. So every given year we're down substantially this year. I won't go into that, but basically the market is saturated in frozen and canned vegetables across North America today, and we're getting imports coming in from Egypt, from Belgium, from China, from all over the place. So it's a tough industry at the moment, but in a normal year, the team here will put up around 5,500 acres of peas for freezing and another 2,600-ish of sweet corn, again, for whole kernel corn that gets frozen. So pretty stable. Just got some challenges that the industry needs to iron out here this year. So, yeah, good question. Thank you. So yeah, following seeding, our team of agronomists pretty well takes over and monitors the crop through the season. While we greatly appreciate the support of the third-party agronomists in the region too, another reason I'm here, it's a great opportunity to find synergies between our organizations. We're all playing in the same sandbox. We might as well hold hands while we're doing it. So I'll dive a little bit into peas. Again, I'm not going to get too technical, A, before lunch, and B, you know more about the pea physiology than I do for sure. But 3 key takeaways. I'm a guy that starts with the conclusions and works back from there. So I'll show you the conclusions right off the get-go. Early water is very important for stand homogeny. We don't have the luxury in our crop of letting the stragglers catch up to the more mature ones. As I mentioned, we have a 1 to 2 day harvest window. So if we have some delayed emergers that come up over a 4 to 5 day period, those late emergers are not going to contribute to yields and can actually become a quality issue later on if they're hanging flat pods or flowers or other things. Those items of the plant can likely get stripped off and actually become a foreign material that we need to clean out in the processing facility, which is quite difficult with a heavy succulent piece of material like stem or a pod. Number 2, nightshade is a bad day. Everybody knows what nightshade looks like. Sometimes our plant operations people, how do I say this nicely on camera? Our plant operations people don't always understand agriculture and sometimes believe that we send trucks to the pea factory to get a nice clean load of succulent peas to send for freezing. So when nightshade shows up in a truck, they expect it to be cleaned up in the field immediately. Well, we should have been acting 70 days ago, not the day of harvest. So it's a continuous improvement effort. I'm trying to work with the minor use committees across the provinces to get more options available to us. And again, that's something that you fine folks can work on too, but certainly proper identification. We learned a lot about good IPM yesterday. Proper identification when that weed is small, knowing crop history on where our high-risk environments are, and bringing in a full integrated management process to ensure that we can do everything we can to minimize the risk of nightshade escapes in a crop. The best will be, as you can imagine, why nightshade is an issue is not necessarily from a crop competition standpoint, but it's when it turns to the reproductive stage. Everybody knows what an immature nightshade berry looks like. Everybody knows what a bag of frozen peas looks like. Now try to clean that out in a processing plant. I don't totally understand the food safety side of it, but I'm told that it's quite a toxic berry too at a particular concentration. So nightshade bad. Okay. Number 3, similar to number 2, field pea is not a succulent pea. And the reason I bring that up is when we get into Western Canada and we have a lot of field peas and other pulses, you can almost open up any herbicide catalog and you can find not a pile of options, relatively speaking, but lots of options for weed control in field peas. That does not mean we can use that herbicide in succulent peas. Crop group 6, which the legume vegetables fit into, is broken into 3 separate categories. You have crop group 6A, 6B, and 6C. Succulent peas fall into crop group 6B, which is a succulent shelled pea or bean. Field peas fall into C. Where that becomes an issue is when we start to talk about MRLs and looking at international trade. We must be aware now and going forward that it could be up to 50% of what we produce here in southern Alberta could cross the border into the US. And in the last year, I'm getting more and more requests from our sales and supply chain teams asking me, does our crop comply with MRLs and other international regs in the Caribbean, in Southeast Asia, in Europe? And I'm not in a place where I can confidently say yes or no, but we must ensure that anything that we do here in southern Alberta keeps our market open for the US. That's a huge trading partner for us here and something we must be cognizant of. Historically, that has not been much of an issue for us, as this region primarily only serviced the Western Canadian market. That has changed in the last year or two, which changes how we manage our crops. So I just want to leave you with the fact that when you're looking at control options in the field, a field pea is not a succulent pea, and vice versa. Okay? So that's peas in a nutshell. The only one I wanted to bring up, and this comes from a project that we did in the East, we call it the Pea Accelerator Challenge, and it kind of, it builds on the wheat yen. Has anybody heard of the yen program? Might be an East thing where we don't know how to grow wheat. It started as a European thing, and essentially it was a mountain of data collection through the production cycle on a multi-year basis. It includes soil sampling, tissue sampling, grain sampling, cropping history, and it was basically just a farmer-led data dump where we tried to see if there's any information that comes out of that data dump, or at least some trends that would help drive future research and development initiatives. So we kind of took that model. We found out that we can't call it the yen for legal reasons, apparently. The lawyers kind of got involved and whatever, okay, we'll change the name. So with that, what we've been doing the last 2 years is we've been taking very intensive soil samples, following that up with tissue samples and peas throughout the year, and then following that up with harvest results on a micro scale throughout the field. So growers would sign up to be a part of it. Our team would do all the work, but we would pick 10 to 20 sample sites throughout the field and intensively sample those areas. And what came out of that was, well, my summer student is based in Ontario, and it rained almost all of May, so I had a pile of rain day jobs or make work projects for her. So what I asked her to do was pull all of this information, every single tissue sample and soil sample that we've got, going back 3 or 4 years, and just categorize them. What trends are coming out of some of that reporting that we're getting? And I don't know what it means yet, and I'll let you guys mull on it and see how it relates to southern Alberta. But some trends really came out of that. So of the 97 samples that were pulled at the 3 to 4 node stage in peas, 53% of them came back lower deficient in magnesium. Again, this is from the Great Lakes region. Calcareous soils tend to be lower CEC, lower organic matter, leaches magnesium. I apologize, I don't know if that's applicable to here. You can answer that question yourselves. The other one that really came out was 39% being lower deficient in boron. That's another one that we're starting to really focus on in the east. Corn growers in the east on sandy soils that are applying boron to their field corn near the vegetative to reproductive switch, seeing some massive yield gains from just a little sniff of boron applied foliarly or in their top dress application or side dress application at knee-high corn. So it was kind of interesting to see boron come out of that. Moving further into the season, we also did a round of sample at bloom. I will note that the target was to pull these samples at 10% bloom. Some of them got pulled at full bloom or maybe even flat pod because I have this much resource for this much work. The trends that came out of that, sulfur started to show up. Again, you guys are familiar with sulfur. We're dealing with it more now in the Great Lakes. You guys are well more advanced on that here. But sulfur was showing up, magnesium, boron, and then manganese was starting to show up a little bit at the end. I'll preface all this with there's a huge variability in planting dates, in soil types, in cropping history, and variety, and weather patterns that are in this data set. What this doesn't answer is, okay, well, if I go out and apply some ammonium sulfate with my upfront fertilizer blend, am I going to reduce how much is loaded deficient? I don't know, but that's the sort of stuff that we're starting to work on now. So the idea of the project originally was to see what trends exist and to drive our future research and development activities, and it has certainly done that. It has pointed us in a direction of, hey, maybe I wonder, so we put some methodologies together to do some research to answer some of these questions going forward. So that's all I wanted to bring up on peas for now. Before I move on to corn, was there any questions? I'm not expecting any in peas, but somebody tell me I'm wrong, please, or you've got this figured out and then I can stop spending money. Cool. And kudos to the two of you that dragged this thing all the way from where it was. I'm glad it stopped raining and I got to use it. Okay, corn is one that I really want to focus on with this group. Corn is a crop that we feel very passionate about as an organization. We feel it's a crop that we do very well once it arrives at the plants. So we do spend quite a bit of time on refining our processes at the production facility to really drive our financial performance in this crop. What have I got for time? 15? 15, okay. We've done a little bit of work on the agriculture side, just trying to match that up and really drive our productivity. But essentially what happens when that corn arrives at the plant, we've really just harvested the the ear off the plant in the field. It's still got the husk on it the same way you'll buy it at the roadside stand. It's just done mechanically and in high volumes. When it arrives at the plant, it goes through a mechanical husking process. Sometimes it's steamed or something to loosen the husk. Goes through some rollers to peel all those husks off, and essentially you just have a bare, unhusked ear that heads through the factory. The next major process is a bank of cutters. So essentially what's happening is those ears are being automatically fed into mechanical cutters at up to a rate of 100 ears per minute. Ear characteristics are really important at this point because it drives, if we put an ear in backwards versus pointy end first, it has a dramatic impact on the quality of the cut coming off of the ear. So we have to select varieties that are growing an ear that have a nice taper at the tip. What I really want to focus on here is all of our production, or the performance of our production, a lot of that is driven from that cutter bank. So we really need to focus on the quality of the ear that we're producing. And I don't think it gets enough focus as it should in sweet corn. Growers will pimp out planters until they are blue in the face in the East. You can find almost any add-on you could possibly dream of, and somebody's selling it to put it on a corn planter. And farmers love to do it, but all the information to go along with that aftermarket equipment is often being driven from a field corn market. So some of that we can relate to a little bit in sweet corn, but the piece that we're missing in the field corn is that plant operation side. So often the data that's being generated from that research is on yield only. So I want to focus on stand quality. And again, my student did a little bit of work last year because, like I said, it's not getting enough focus. So a little bit about corn physiology. These are my 3 drawings, similar to our John Deere fella yesterday. That's the quality of my artwork. Does anybody know how many ears it's physiologically possible to put on a corn plant, or how many it wants to grow? 6, right? Yep. So what happens ultimately every time you throw a stressor at something and every crop reacts the same, that's its yield potential, and it just starts kicking it down every time it deems that it's under stress or it needs to be defensive for some reason. So basically what we want for processing is we want carbon copy ears going through our process. Every single ear needs to be exactly the same as the last. So if we have 6 ears on a stalk of corn, it's not very likely that they're all going to be identically the same. So what we really want to strive for is one primary ear with no secondary or third ears being produced. So how do we do that? The best way to do it often is crowding. It's crowding stress. We want to find that optimum population where that plant is going to produce 1 ear, and that 1 ear is going to be the biggest that it can possibly be genetically. If it has room, it's not going to grow a 10-pound ear. It has a maximum ear size that it will put on. If extra resources are available, those resources are going to go to the 2nd ear, to the 3rd ear, and all the way down until you hit that 6. So what we're doing down at the far end here with Farming Smarter, we started it in the East a couple years ago as a response to population trial. And that's something that you've probably identified in, say, some of your bean trials that I see around here, likely in some wheat too. You've got different responses on a cultivar by cultivar basis. Yes, sir?
What would you call your optimum population in Eastern Canada, and what do you think it's going to be here relative?
Optimum, or what are we doing?
Okay, both, yeah.
So what are we doing in the East today is probably a range of 19 to 22,000 plants per acre. If you move into the irrigated sands of central Wisconsin, they'll push to 24, 25. The irrigated ground of the PNW, they're pushing 30. Here, we're 26 to 30, depending on cultivar. I ask why 26 and why 30, and nobody can give me an answer. I ask why 19 and 22 in the East, and somebody says, well, that was the number 15 years ago. And we're not growing any of the hybrids today that we did 15 years ago. And from my own farm, I can tell you that every time I dump a new brand of seed or different hybrid in the planter, I'm changing the rate, because those seed companies have done a pile of work to determine what is the maximum or what is the optimum planting population. So theoretically, sweet corn shouldn't be any different. It's the same species, and we should not be running a cookie cutter program across 47 different hybrids of corn that we grow to satisfy our corn program every year. So if anybody knows how to mechanically harvest sweet corn 2 rows at a time, please let me know, because that's our biggest limiting factor, is my student and her patience level, because she's heading out to the field and manually harvesting all these ears and weighing them individually. So if anybody has a Dragon's Den idea for a small plot sweet corn harvester, let Lewis know. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. So we've got 3 or 4 different hybrids, populations ranging from, I think, 15 or 20,000 up to 35,000 plants per acre. And what we're measuring is what happens to the size of those ears. We're going to evaluate how many plants are producing 2 ears, 3 ears. Ultimately, the target being every plant only produces 1 ear, and that ear is as large as it could possibly be. So that's step number 1 in stand establishment, is getting the appropriate seed drop and the appropriate final plant stand at the end. So I had a colleague ask me the other day, because I called her in an absolute panic because I was staring at a really, really ugly stand of corn. And this particular colleague went down the path of, well, we do stand counts. There's 22,000 plants there. I said, yes, you're correct. But they're in 4 bunches of 5 to 6 plants in 18 inches of row. So yes, you average 22,000 an acre, but you've got gaps in those stands. And what's going to happen to that group of 5 or 6 plants across 12 to 18 inches? They're not going to grow a 1 pound ear. It'll be lucky if they even grow an ear at all. So this is heading way out into left field for an extreme example, and certainly not one that's real in the real world. But I do want to bring some attention to it, because even in Ontario, where we base our rotations around corn, it's still not getting a lot of attention. So as we continue to grow more corn here, and I'm thinking there's some private agronomists in the group that are likely dealing with a lot of silage corn being grown more and more. This is something that I think needs a lot more attention, and it all starts at the planter. So every planter is going to be different. I'm not going to tell you how to fix it. That's going to be a case-by-case scenario. I just want to draw your attention to it and the impact that it has, and why it's so important in sweet corn versus some of the other potential markets for sweet corn, or for corn. So here's 2 stands that I've just drawn, and this is a real-world example that my student found last year. I asked her to go out and evaluate as many fields as she could on the stand, picking out singulation and doubles or multiple seed drops. And this is all happening at the meter. This is where the meter's grabbing 2 or multiple seeds and dropping them in the same spot, rather than just grabbing 1. So what she did, she harvested all the ears from all of these plants, even if they produce 2 ears and that ear was harvestable. And I'm going to come back to what harvestable is, but she harvested by hand every harvestable ear throughout a 1/1000th of an acre, replicated it a bunch of times. She also found some spots that had doubles or multiple seeds. And what she did was she individually weighed each ear and took measurements. We averaged it all together. Basically what happened, and this grower, he runs around with, I'm going to say, that's a 24 row planter. I think he trades every other year, and he only plants 500 acres of corn. Like, he can plant all his corn in a day and a half, but yet he's the busiest guy I know somehow. So anyways, this is not an old beat up planter. This is top of the line equipment that she found. So this is quite standard. We are going to see doubles, don't get me wrong. This is number 1 up here, is a pie in the sky idea, something to target. But this is still a really good stand. Excuse me. And what she found was all the ears that were produced from these double plants, the average ear weight was, do the math, 0.15 of a pound per ear less, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. When you run all the math out, assuming that the ears produced on these doubles were all harvestable, meaning greater than 2 inches in diameter. Why that's important is because that's often the setting for the stripper plates in the corn head. When it pulls the stalk down and strips the ear off, most of the time those plates are set at 2 inches. And the reason for that is if it gets any tighter, you start taking in leaf, you start taking in stalk. We pay for all that weight that goes to the plant, and then we give it away to feed to a cow. So it's an economics thing there. That, and we don't even want to produce those smaller ears because it's no good for anybody. So assuming that they're harvestable, a situation like this where in 1/1000th of an acre we've only got 2 double ears, it's a 3% decrease in yield, and that compares to perfect singulation. Okay. Now let's assume that these doubles produced an ear that was less than 2 inches, which is often the case. In this particular case, they grew harvestable ears. The majority of the time, those ear diameters are less than 2 inches. Those ears are going to go right through the stripper plates and get chewed up on the ground. All of a sudden now you're looking at a 23% yield decrease versus 100% singulation. So there's huge yield opportunity here for the grower in maintaining or establishing a good stand of sweet corn. I could get into all the processability stuff after, but again, there's some huge opportunities there too. Yes, sir. 5 minutes? Perfect. The other thing I want to bring up is even emergence. And I mentioned it a little bit in peas, the peas not catching up based on harvest time. Corn will catch up to a certain extent, but the impact on the size of the ear that it produces is absolutely massive. And we don't capture a lot of that in field corn because often those stripper plates are set a lot more narrow, just enough for that thinner stalk to go through and strip the ear off. We're going to be wasting a lot of these ears. So some of the top corn growers in the US will say that they want their corn to come up over a 12 to 24 hour period, ideally 12. You start getting outside of that, having corn that emerges over a 2 or 3 day window, this is the sort of thing that you can expect. So it's my drawing here. This shorter plant here, let's say it emerged on day 3. All the tall ones were day 1. So here's a day 3, here's a day 2. Quite often, what we see is this stalk that produced, or this plant that emerged 2 days after all of its neighbors, is going to produce, if anything, a very small unharvestable ear. Almost every time. It'll never be harvestable. Ears that emerged the day after all their neighbors, it'll reduce its ear size by roughly half based on the surveys that my student has done the last year. Again, this could be harvestable, it might not be harvestable, so as far as estimating yield impacts, it's a little bit harder, but I can guarantee you this one is going to have a massive impact on our processability in the plant. So, in summary, stand quality, not just stand counts, is super, super, super important in sweet corn. Yield opportunities are massive. Processability opportunities are massive. It's something that I'm focusing on a lot going forward here, and something that I think, like I said, even in a primary corn production area, it's something that's slipping through the cracks, and I think we need to bring the importance of that back up. I'm going to wrap up a little bit on corn, just with some other thoughts to kind of keep in the back of your minds on nutrient management. Generally, the recommendation on nutrient management that I'm making is if you have growers that are growing field corn or commercial corn for silage or for grain, generally speaking, the recommendation for nitrogen is about 2/3 of what the grower would use for his field corn. And where that comes from is just harvest timing and crop nitrogen uptake. So speaking of crop nitrogen uptake, we talked about it in the wheat yesterday a little bit. So similarly in corn, your peak uptake for nitrogen in corn is from that 6th leaf through to the tassel, or R1, the silking stage. So we want to make sure that we have all that nitrogen available during that rapid growth phase. Corn will really kick into high gear from about starting at about knee high. And I almost wonder can we even get the nitrogen into the corn fast enough to meet the demand? And we do have some growers that are playing around with some liquefied urea, some slow release foliar nitrogen. I'm not going to go down that slippery slope, but the concept behind it is, can we just not get nitrogen into the plant fast enough, especially when it's 35 degrees out and we have moisture? That stuff is growing fast. The other thing on nitrogen that isn't talked about a whole lot, and this comes out of central Wisconsin where they really have nitrate issues in the water. There's a big focus on nitrogen management, particularly in the central sands. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 CEC soils, 1% organic matter. They really have to micromanage their nitrogen to keep it out of the water. They're looking at use rates, nitrogen use efficiency, how much is left in the stock, and what they've actually come up with is you can apply a very, very healthy nitrogen credit to your following crop after sweet corn. And basically the philosophy is it's taking up all of that nitrogen, but it's not translocating it to the ear. And most of it has to do with harvest timing. So it's there, it's in the factory, it's in the stems, it's in the roots, it's in the leaves, and it's left over after harvest where we're only removing the ear, and such a little percentage of that nitrogen uptake has been translocated to the ear. So how that relates to here likely needs some local research, but conceptually, I think there's some big opportunity and maybe some missed opportunity. Thinking about the environmental side with the work that Ashley's doing, is there some opportunity to incorporate some cover cropping opportunities there to capture some of that residual nitrogen at the end, possibly releasing it at the correct time for the following crop. Huge opportunities, I think, in nitrogen management in sweet corn, but most certainly we need to evaluate that on a local basis. Following up on the nutrient management, growers using phosphorus. I am scared of in-furrow phosphorus. I also come from a dry land production environment, so maybe we can get away with a little bit of liquid P in furrow here. Ultimately, we have many growers set up in most of our sweet corn regions with a 2x2 band process. Any growers that are applying phosphorus, I do encourage 40-to-1 ratio phosphorus to zinc going in with it. It does help some phosphorus uptake in a low phos environment. I do encourage some K in a band, never with the seed. Sulfur, I can do away with. You guys are familiar with that here. And I think everything else we've talked about. Weed management, that's one that we're really not concerned about from a quality perspective. We're harvesting the crop up high. Anything that's down low is not going to become a quality issue for us. We're really just looking at yields. And we've got lots of options for weed control in corn, and another reason I think growers should include that in their rotation, just to bring some resistant management tools to the toolbox and hopefully keep some of that fine kochia at bay for you guys. So with that, I'm being told to zip it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Dan. A big round of applause for Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
we have a door prize from our friends at BDO.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So my question, what is the most important part of corn production?
Maybe crowding.
Stand establishment? Stand establishment. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Max.